Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Lacey Township Board of Education meeting, August 19th, 2019. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Adequate notice of this meeting was advertised in the Asbury Park Press and the Beacon on January 10th, 2019, and by posting the notice in the Forked River Post Office and the Lenoka Harbor Post Office and the Ocean County Library, Lacey Branch, and by filing a copy of this notice with the Lacey Township Clerk as required by the Open Public Meeting Act. Roll call for attendance, please.
Sir, Mr. Peters. Mrs. DeSenza.
Present.
Mr. Riggs. Here. Mr. Blas. Mrs. Downing. Yes, here. Mr. Morandi. Here. Mr. Giordano.
Present.
We have a quorum.
At this time, I'd like to open the floor for public comment.
Close the floor.
Seeing none, I'll make a motion to close the floor for public comment.
Second.
At this time, I'll open it up for board member comment.
I have a question, but I can ask it later. We want
Sure.
to talk to Mr. Magyar.
Okay. Close for board comment, superintendent comments?
Yes. So I want to welcome Mr. Mark Magyar, Director of Policy and Communications for Senate President Sweeney. We just had a brief conversation to just lay some groundwork on what Mr. Magyar was going to be talking about. So we invite you, Mr. Magyar, to provide us a little bit more maybe clarification or to answer any questions from other board members who you were just not sitting with on state aid, the future of state aid perhaps, and the impacts, kind of what you talked about with us, the impacts on school districts such as ours. Yeah, absolutely. Please
that'll be
help
fine.
yourself. And we thank you for taking the time out, especially to come out in such nasty weather.
We really appreciate it.
Not a problem. Actually, it's not a nasty weather until I got off the parkway. I don't want to say anything. I don't think it's like only raining in Lacey Township, but it does seem that way when I got here. Just say a couple things we had talked about earlier. We talked about the school funding formula, the SFRA, and Lacey was facing currently a $4 million cut as of 2017 in a state aid based upon the decision in 2017 to actually run the school funding formula as it had been intended to be run back in 2017 without adjustment aid and without growth caps. And one of the things we had talked about was that this is a dynamic formula. So, for example, we had talked about how Lacey is just like had a very large kindergarten class this year, and you have other student enrollment growth coming in, and that this is a self-adjusting formula. So, for example, when everybody was writing about the SFRA reform bill S2, they were about a district losing $4.2 million, or a district losing $10 million, or a district gaining $10 million. But it's a dynamic number. So, for example, like Keensburg, which had been slated to lose $5.7 million and was facing an $800,000 aid cut this year. There's a new apartment building. I went up in town. They'd added 50 students from that apartment building, and that's only about a third of the students from the apartment building. And when I met with the Keensburg Board of Education back about 5 months ago, I said, you should really wait for your numbers and see what you actually end up with, because I had met with them the week the state aid numbers were going to come out. And then they called later in the week, they said, you're right, our $800,000 cut is $500,000. And if this trend continues, most of our aid cut will go away. So, again, your $4 million number is a dynamic number. If you're getting enrollment growth, you're receiving, the reason there was an adjustment aid cut coming in at Lacey Township was because your assumed population had dropped from 4,400 to 3,900. As it grows back up, the size of the adjustment aid cut would reduce. As the average income in the town changes, perhaps your aid would go up. So I mean, it's a dynamic formula. So I do want to talk about that, and obviously I'll take questions about that later on. I do want to point out that we are adding, the state has added about $560 million to like underfunded districts in the last two budgets, $360 million 2 years ago, $208 million this past year. The other thing that we're working on and that you had talked about was the growth of extraordinary special education costs. The state added $50 million this year in extraordinary special education aid. So the reimbursement percentage for extraordinary special education costs is going up from about 55% to about 65%. And presumably, when you get your aid numbers back for what you filed in July, you'll get a higher proportion this year than you got last year. Presumably, the increase should be somewhere in the 20% range for reimbursement. And our goal, both Democrats and Republicans in the legislature, is to eventually have the state fully take over all extraordinary special education aid costs. That is the out-of-district placements. $40,000 or more in public placements, $55,000 or more in private placements, and a part of this is the idea that the state will ultimately also take on state will also take on the full cost of extraordinary special education, and is also looking to take over the administration and placement to a greater extent, have a greater role, have the state have a greater role, and possibly the state would handle any court challenges. That's another thing we've talked about, which would be of a tremendous benefit to local school districts. Finally, the last major area that we had talked about, you're an SEHB BP member, School Employees Health Benefits Plan. One of the pieces of our legislation that we have out there is a proposal to have the School Employees Health Benefits Plan come down at least to begin with to the State Health Benefits Plan at direct PPO level. If you did that, you were looking at cost savings of well over 20% on your district costs for health benefits. And if you're at $15 million a year, that's a cost of $12 million. If you come down further to a 86% level or 80% goal plan, as the Senate President's recommended, the savings would be even higher. So there are a lot of moving parts at this point on the state aid side, on the benefits side, on the extraordinary special education side, and I'll take any questions.
We just asked about the, well, we wanted to ask about the emergent aid application that we just put in on July 29th, I believe it was.
The state school aid law, I was passed in 2017 at the same time that we fixed the school funding law, provided for a fund to be administered by the Commissioner of Education to help districts that are facing extraordinary problems in transition aid. We had an example of this. We talked earlier about the dynamic formula, right? Glassboro was listed till the end of June of 2017 as being a net gainer. It turns out that because of students taking up rental housing and sort of pushing out low-income families, Glassboro went overnight from a net gainer in a state aid to a net loser. The Education Commissioner provided a transitional aid to Glassboro and make up for that. They had no ability to plan for it. Because everything is done retroactively and your formula on enrollment adjusts. Obviously, if you didn't know that you're going to have large enrollment growth in the kindergarten this year, that's something to talk about in your proposal to the Education Commissioner for free emergent relief. Yeah.
I know this is a small part of the picture, but what about the mandates that come down from the State Department of Education, mandates that we have to pay for?
Mm-hmm.
Is there any talk about getting rid of the costs for us and you guys paying for it?
There's a mandated state pay law. I'm not sure if that applies for school districts in the same way it does for municipalities and counties or not.
What was it called? I'm sorry.
There's a state mandate state pay law that certainly applies to all the mandates on municipalities and counties. I thought it applied to school districts also, but I'm not sure. It may not.
Gotten relief
It's
for any mandate.
something to look at.
Yeah.
So just to give you an example, and Linda, you bring up a good point, Alyssa's Law. Fortunately for us, we already had silent alarms in place. One of the things that we were just recently struggling with is the fact that we were going to have to put strobe lights. It's a minor example, but just an example of something that we had not budgeted for.
Right.
Fortunately, we learned that the strobe lights are not necessary, but had we had put them in, it's just another part of the budget. And, we take school security very, very, very seriously. We're in the process of a massive vestibule construction project. But that's just an example, and there are many more. Harassment, intimidation, and bullying, when that was implemented, the ABR, we had to hire extra staff to ensure that we were compliant with the ABR. So those are just some examples. We are rule followers in education. It comes naturally to us. I say to my staff all the time, when they get upset about a new rule, and I say, I understand. We don't make the rules, but we're certainly going to follow them. That's becoming more and more difficult as these unfunded mandates come our way. So I thank Linda for bringing that up. I have a question. You mentioned earlier, you asked for district support on getting back to the state health benefits plan
Paths of Progress.
that legislation. And what I'm going to ask you, Mr. Magyar, is for you to let us know what it is that we can do to mobilize our people here to support that, because that is something
That is key.
that could be tremendous for not only our district, but many others throughout the state. So if you could let us know what we can do,
Yeah, it's
we will do it.
tremendous. Reach out to the governor. Either as like individual board members or a school district or as a group. And I
Any
mean, I
meetings
think
we
that
can attend?
I'm
Are
sorry?
there any meetings that we can attend? Any tables we can sit at?
We'll let you know for sure. We're we've been out there a lot on this, campaigning on it. There are other elements to it in addition to the health benefit reform, toward the K through 12 regionalization proposals are on a statewide basis. We also have a proposal in there for a hybrid pension plan that, because the state pays for full teacher pension costs, there'd be no savings local district, but the savings would be the state budget and frankly also to county and municipal governments on their local government pension costs. This is something, just to put this in a perspective, the pension savings are like upwards of $25 billion over a 30-year period. The health benefit savings are in the $2 billion plus range on an annual basis, which is a lot because most of it is going to most of it's on the local school district, municipal and county side, as opposed to the state budget. So I mean, this is something we just think. I mean, we have a tremendous challenges out there on the state aid side, on transportation side, on the environmental side, clean water. I mean, there are all sorts of fully funding the school formula, holding down cost of a higher education. I mean, all sorts of things that benefit taxpayers across the board and citizens across the board. And our feeling is that we have to make the state more affordable, but B, we also cannot afford to spend money that we do not need to spend, that could be better spent attacking other problems. Yeah.
Quick question. Thank you for coming out tonight first.
Sure.
With the special education state helping out with that, would that be all students just with an IEP, or would you talk about students that are going to other districts, transferred to other districts? Could you elaborate more on that, please?
That would affect all students that you are paying the costs for. Yes.
So would that be our
the
in-house
extraordinary
teachers
special
that are teaching special education? Would that include that, or just students that go out of district?
It would include students who go out of district. It would not affect in the same way you're like in a district special ed costs. Now, one of the things on in-district special education, and this was raised earlier, the state currently has a census-based system, which basically says this arose back in 2006, 2007 in reaction to the fact that districts were like overclassifying students to get additional aid, on the basis of over a classification. So what the state did at that point was it said, okay, we are going to give every district, we're going to assume that like every district has 14% costs for special education. Now, obviously, every district does not have the same costs. Your superintendent mentioned earlier that your costs are at 26%. We are looking at a way to go toward a plan that reimburses or funds districts on the basis of their actual costs, as opposed to a presumed percentage going to every district. This is not going to be really fast. We certainly want to spend at least a year figuring it out, talking with the special education community, talking with with schools, with the superintendents, special education experts in developing a plan. But there's a commitment out there take another look at that. And it's a bipartisan commitment that really arose out of the Select Committee on Special Education, which also is where the idea of like increasing extraordinary special education reimbursement came from. This is a part of the same broad overall special education reform package. But we know we have to do it. We haven't done it yet, and it will not be immediate. But we are going to look at it.
I just asked that this please be monitored with the special education percentage at different schools. I could see some schools drastically going through
Yep.
the roof with their rates of that special education percentage. If that could be monitored, we'd really appreciate that as a
Sure.
district.
Absolutely.
And just
Good.
please put in a good word with the DOE commissioner about our emergency aid application the next time you
Right.
speak to him.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Any other questions?
Thank you.
Great.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank
Thank you for coming.
thank
I
you
have
very
one,
much for the invite.
not
Yeah.
so much a question, more of just a statement. Thanks for taking my phone calls. Thanks
course.
for actually showing up tonight. I know this is a big hassle, and you're running all over the state. You're talking about Glassboro and Keensburg. We certainly can all appreciate the different districts, but you come out to us. This is what we care about: Lacey Township and our school. And just talking to you earlier. Very informative, and I'm sure the rest of us down the line thought the same thing, too. I'm sure that we didn't know it was variable rates. We didn't know some of these things walking through the door. So there is some kind of lights at the end of the tunnel here. But just, again, thank you for coming out and taking your time to explain this to us, because
Oh, it's great.
really
Well,
appreciate it.
thank you very much. Every time I come out, I learn stuff, and I mean, you really need to be out there talking to districts, and like understanding the particular aspects of a particular district's issues. So, which helps to inform, hopefully to inform better policy overall. So, thank you very, very much.
We
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It's nice to meet you. Thanks.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. Help yourself to some cookies on the way out.
I will. Thank you very much. Take care. And all my contact information, for any questions, just call.
Oh, I'll give it out, don't worry.
Thank you so much.
Good night. Oh, well,
You ready? Yes.
cross our fingers. I
Ready?
just have one quick question.
Oh, okay.
How long will it take to get the long-range facilities review plan approximately? Will it be the course of the whole year, or can the architect do that in a few months, or
Less than 2.
2 years?
Less than 2 months.
Oh, that quick, okay.
Yep.
Interesting, I can't wait to see the results. Thank
Me
you.
too. Ready? Go.
Motion for private session?
Be it resolved that a private session be convened for the purpose of discussing confidential legal matters. The subject matter of these discussions will be disclosed to the public when the reason for confidentiality subsides. The length of the private session estimated to be about 15 minutes, after which the board shall reconvene and proceed with business. Action may be taken. Motion, please.
Move.
Second.
Welcome to private session.